My ex-wife abandoned our kids in the freezing cold for a date, so I responded with a move that ensured she'll carry regret for the rest of her life. My ex-wife abandoned our kids at my empty house in the freezing cold to go on a date, and now I'm fighting for full custody and justice. I, 38 male, have been divorced for a year. My ex-wife, 37 female, and I have 2 kids, ages 10 and 7. I have partial custody of the kids, and they spend half of the month with me, but I still have to send child support to my ex-wife for the time they spend with her. My income is a lot higher than hers, so I have to pay alimony and child support both. Our divorce was not a pleasant one, and we're not on good terms. I filed for divorce because we had been fighting a lot during the last few years of our marriage, and she'd completely changed as a person. During our last fight, she screamed at me and said that she wished she'd never married me at all. So after that, I left her and filed for divorce. She didn't even try to contact me or try to get me back after that. Now it's been a year since our divorce. 6 months after our divorce, she started going out with another man, and I found out about it from a common friend. I was disappointed that she'd moved on so soon, but there was nothing I could do about it. So I just let it go and didn't bring it up with her at all. We only talked about the kids, and that was it, since there was nothing else we had to talk about. That's how it's been for the last 6 months. Even though I was a little hurt that she'd moved on so quickly, I knew that she was a good mother to our kids, so I didn't do anything that could hurt our family. However, recently she did something that convinced me that she's a horrible human being and doesn't even deserve to be around our kids. 10 days ago, I was away on a business trip and would be back in 3 days. Technically, she was supposed to drive and drop off the kids at my place on the second day, and then I would take over from there, since it was my turn to have them. But I told her about the trip and asked her if she'd be able to look after them for just those 3 extra days until I returned. She agreed to it, and I even have screenshots of her saying yes. So I went on the business trip without any worries. On the second evening, I got a call from my son asking where I was, because their mother had dropped them off at my place, but I wasn't even there. They'd been ringing the doorbell for 15 minutes, and nobody had come to the door, so they were waiting outside. It was freezing back at home at the time, so I told them to go to our neighbor's house for a while until I sorted this whole mess out, because I believed that my ex-wife had made a mistake. Unfortunately, my neighbors were also out of town, and the street that I lived on was pretty much empty that day. I've recently moved into a new house, and the area that I'm living in is still relatively new, so most of the houses haven't been moved into yet. Only the house opposite mine was occupied by an old couple, but they weren't at home, and the other houses on the street were empty and unoccupied. I was panicking already when my son told me that the neighbors weren't at home, so I told him to wait for a couple of seconds while I called his mom. Then I called my ex-wife and asked her to pick up the kids from my place and take them home, because I didn't want them catching a cold from waiting in the snow. I expected her to apologize quickly for forgetting and then go right back, but to my shock and horror, she told me that the kids were my problem now, since technically it was my turn to have them. I didn't know what to say, so I started requesting her to go back and not do this to me, not for my sake, but for the kids. She disconnected the call. With shaky hands, I tried to text her and asked if she could please just take the kids back home. She said that she was getting late for a date with her boyfriend, and they wanted to celebrate 8 months of being together. By then, more than 20 minutes had passed since my call with my son, and they'd been waiting in the cold for almost 35 minutes. With no other option, I had to call CPS and explain the situation to them. They were at the location within minutes and took responsibility for driving my kids from my house to my parents' house, which is a little out of town. My kids are too young to have found their way there on their own, and they didn't know any bus routes or anything, so they literally couldn't have gone there by themselves. My in-laws aren't alive, as they passed away before my ex-wife and I even got married. Any other relatives I had in the city weren't going to take care of my kids until I returned, so my parents' place was my safest bet. I also reported my ex-wife for neglecting our kids and putting them in danger on purpose. By the time the cops discovered them, they had been sitting on the front steps of my door and were literally using my younger son's blanket to keep themselves warm. I felt like crap after they informed me of the state my kids were in, but felt much better after they'd been dropped off at my parents' house. My ex-wife was placed under arrest for negligence within hours of my report, and I went to sleep that day feeling vindicated as hell, knowing that my kids were safe and sound and that my ex-wife would have hell to pay once I came back. I'd already contacted my lawyer right after being informed that my children were all right, and we were going to file for full custody as soon as I returned. That would mean an end to all the child support payments at least, and I couldn't wait to teach her a lesson. She and I didn't speak for the next couple of days, but I knew that she had been charged with just a misdemeanor. We didn't talk until I returned. Once I came back home from my trip, I went to see my kids first, and we had a long chat about whatever had happened. I apologized for not being able to be there for them in person and said that this would never happen again, because now I was going to file for full custody and make sure that they were with me always. My eldest one looked a little too relieved and happy when I said that, which made me uncomfortable, because I'd always assumed that my ex-wife had been a good mom. She wasn't a lot of things, but to my knowledge, she wasn't a bad mother, since she always seemed to care for the kids when we were together. Even after our divorce, the kids didn't give me any reason to be concerned about how life was for them with their mother. However, after I asked why he was so happy about not having to live with his mom anymore, my son began to hesitate and said that his mom had forbidden him from talking to me about these things. I didn't like the sound of that, so I pressed on, and eventually he told me that for so long, he and his brother had been having a really hard time at their mom's place because she was very strict all of a sudden. She wouldn't allow them to have any candy or junk while they were there for half the month, and they were forced to eat the same food every day, the kind of food that my kids refer to as sick food, not because it's sick in a cool way, but because it's what I feed them when they're sick and need to avoid anything that's too rich or heavy for their diet. So they'd be forced to eat tasteless porridge and some form of oats every single day for lunch and dinner. Only on weekends would they get something different, but even that would just be toast with some dip. Their mother claimed that this was all for their good health, but I don't understand how a total lack of meat and vegetables in their diet for half of a month was going to make them healthier. I also failed to understand why exactly she'd forbidden them from having candy and junk food. I understand that it's not good for their health if they have it on a regular basis, but I think letting them have some once in a while isn't going to harm them whatsoever. In fact, that's probably even better for them, because then at least they won't develop weird issues about food in the future. They also told me a couple of things. When they were at her place, they were only allowed to go to school and come right back. They weren't allowed to have friends over or go to sleepovers, so they had to save all of that for when they were living with me. My kids were also not allowed to buy anything that they wanted when she took them shopping. No toys, no books, no clothes, not even something like chicken nuggets when they were in the supermarket. She only purchased things that she needed while they stood by her side and stayed quiet throughout, because otherwise she'd yell at them. Worst of all, she had forbidden them from talking to me about any of this, so they hadn't told me anything about the way they were being treated at their mother's house for so long. I didn't understand what was going on, so finally I decided to talk to my ex-wife and find out why she had been doing this to our kids. When I called her to confront her, she started off by yelling at me for calling the cops on her and reporting her, but I ignored all of that and asked her about everything that our kids had complained about. None of it added up, because I paid her enough in child support to be able to afford the things my kids wanted, and yet they were complaining about never having enough, not to eat, not to wear, and not even to play with. So I asked her what was going on, and she told me that she was in between jobs right now and couldn't afford to spend everything on the kids. That still didn't make sense, because I was paying her alimony too, so she could maintain her standard of living. I have a decent income, and the alimony combined with the child support is also a substantial amount, which she can easily live off of without having to compromise our kids' standard of life. I argued with her for a while until she finally snapped and said that it wasn't any of my business what she did with her money, and then disconnected the call. Now that rubbed me the wrong way, because this wasn't her money at all. It was my money that I was sending her for my kids, and she was supposed to use the child support for our kids, not for herself. I could tell that she'd been lying, so my lawyer and I decided that along with filing for full custody, we would also sue her for child abuse and neglect, since that was clearly what was happening here. She already had a criminal case on her hands because of what she'd done to our kids by forcing them to stay out in the cold while I was away on the trip, and now I'd be suing her as well. It's been 1.5 weeks since then, and a couple of days ago she was served. That day itself, she called me up and started shedding her fake crocodile tears. She hadn't contacted me in the middle at all, and only when she realized that she was going to lose custody of her kids did she call me. I had a sneaking suspicion that she didn't call me because she wanted our kids, but because she wanted the child support that came along with it. I told her on the phone the other day that she had created the situation herself, and I could no longer trust her with the kids. So she started telling me that she was just trying to mess with me a little, and that she was going to come back for the kids anyway. I didn't buy it, and I told her that her tears weren't going to move me. Then she said that she couldn't survive without them. The child support was necessary for her to survive, because she was in between jobs. That confirmed what I already believed, that she wanted custody of our kids for the child support, not because she actually loved them. I was already disgusted by that, and I was about to hang up when I heard her friend, an attorney, yelling at her about how she needed to forget about the money from the child support and talk to me about the lawsuit instead. Then my ex-wife switched to talking about that instead and said that I shouldn't be suing her for something so petty, because she already had a lot on her plate. She said the charges against her in the custody case were supposed to begin in a couple of days, and then on top of that the lawsuit, which was also scheduled to take place this week. I've already informed my coworkers and boss that I'm going to have to take breaks regularly for the court cases that I'm a part of now, and they're fine with it as long as my work doesn't suffer too much. But my ex-wife says that since she's between jobs, she can't afford to spend so much time and money on the lawyer as well as attending the meetings. But that wasn't my problem. I told her the same thing that she'd said to me back when I called her when she dropped our kids off at my place. I'll concede that I said that purely out of spite, but I really think that it was mostly because of how she'd been treating me and the kids ever since the divorce, and I couldn't just let it slide every single time. She had alimony payments coming in monthly along with the child support. In spite of that, she deprived my children of a good home environment and scared them into not telling me anything about it as well. I think I'd been totally fair in suing her as well as trying to get full custody, because she'd been selfish, dishonest, and a failure at being a mother. So my being rude to her should have been the least of her concerns. But she just started bawling on the call like a baby and said that I was being horrible to her. She claimed that it was bad enough that she was going to lose custody of her kids. She didn't even think she stood a chance given the circumstances, but on top of that, I was going to go the extra mile to sue her as well. She said that it wasn't fair. I've been feeling really guilty about it, even though I did tell her on the call that there was nothing that could be done now. Ida for suing my ex-wife for neglecting our kids even though she was already facing charges and also had a custody case to deal with. 2 days have passed since I posted here, and I've come to the conclusion that there's no reason for me to feel guilty, thanks to you guys and also my parents who convinced me that I was doing the right thing. I'm sure now that the funds that I'd been sending her for the kids were not being used for them in the slightest, and she was spending it all on herself. She and I don't follow each other on social media, and I'm not exactly in touch with our common friends on a regular basis because of my work. But after I posted here and talked to my parents about this, I decided to discuss this with a couple of my friends as well, because if there was any way to know what her real financial status was, it would be through them. My kids had told me a few hours after my post here that she would be at home most days, but on the weekends she'd be out for hours and leave them with the neighbors. Even some nights, she would make some relative of hers babysit, and she'd come back only in the morning. I think the longer I wait, the more my kids are going to open up, and I'm sure she'd instructed them not to talk about any of this to me, which is why they've been so quiet about all of this and are trying to keep it to themselves even now. So I knew something fishy was going on, and I finally decided to keep my morals and values aside for a while, because now I absolutely had to do a little snooping. I had avoided doing that so far because I believed that after our divorce, she was entitled to her privacy and space away from me. But that had been a huge mistake on my part, because had I not unfollowed her social media profiles, I'd have been able to keep myself updated on what she was up to. I stalked her through a friend's account and found out that her social media was just full of photos of her partying at clubs, drinking, trips to the beach, and her romantic getaways with her boyfriend at expensive hotels. Revelation hit me like a thunderbolt, shattering every preconceived notion I had about my ex-wife's circumstances. Her social media presence was a dazzling spectacle, a curated gallery of opulence and carefree indulgence that could rival any influencer's feed. The vibrant photos of exotic vacations, glittering nights out, and a lifestyle dripping with extravagance stood in stark contrast to the narrative she had fed me, one of financial struggle, unpaid bills, and relentless hardship. She had painted herself as a victim, drowning in debt and barely scraping by. Yet, her online persona told a different story, one of lavish spending and a life unburdened by the worries she claimed to endure. The dissonance was jarring, and it left me reeling as I pieced together the truth. My old friends, the ones I had distanced myself from after the divorce, had known about her facade for some time. They chose silence, not out of malice, but because they felt it wasn't their place to meddle in my personal affairs. I couldn't fault them for it. After all, I had been the one to push them away, retreating into a self-imposed isolation to escape the memories of my ex-wife. She and I had been college sweethearts, and our shared circle of friends from those days carried too many reminders of her. Every conversation, every casual mention of the past, felt like a fresh wound. So, I withdrew, cutting ties with those who had once been my closest confidants. In hindsight, that decision was a mistake, one that left me vulnerable to her deception. But now, I'm rebuilding those bridges, reconnecting with the people who matter, and it feels like a weight has been lifted. The truth about my ex-wife's lies came into sharp focus, and with it, any lingering guilt I had harbored evaporated. She had manipulated me, milking me for money under the guise of providing for our children, all while funneling those resources into her own indulgent lifestyle. Worse still, she had neglected our kids, skimping on their needs and subjecting them to substandard care just to save a few bucks. Her priorities were clear, and they were utterly deplorable. She was willing to let our children suffer, denying them proper nutrition, clothing, and attention, all so she could maintain her facade of glamour. Knowing this, I felt no remorse for her current predicament. She had brought it upon herself, and I was done feeling sorry for someone so callous and self-serving. As we navigate the ongoing lawsuit, the tides are turning decisively in my favor. The second hearing is set for the day after tomorrow, and I'm confident that justice will prevail. My ex-wife, perhaps sensing the inevitability of her defeat, abandoned the custody battle early on. She claimed she couldn't afford to pay her lawyer to juggle 3 separate cases, and in a surprising move, she agreed to terminate her parental rights. This decision, while shocking, was a relief. Our children are now fully in my care, and for the first time in a long while, I can breathe easy, knowing they're safe and free from her neglect. The weight of uncertainty has lifted, and I'm determined to give them the stable, loving home they deserve. The lawsuit took an unexpected turn when her boyfriend, of all people, reached out to me. In a moment of misguided audacity, he called, believing I might sympathize with their plight if he shared their story. Instead, his words only fueled my anger. He had the nerve to ask me to halt the legal proceedings, claiming that my ex-wife was struggling to make ends meet as a freelancer. According to him, she had been working tirelessly since quitting her job post-divorce, trying to support herself, our children, and, unbelievably, him. The absurdity of his plea was infuriating. I had been paying child support diligently, yet my children were being shortchanged while she funneled money into her boyfriend's education and their shared escapades. The call, which I recorded on a hunch that he might try to intimidate me, became a pivotal piece of evidence. Instead of threats, it revealed the depth of her betrayal. I confronted him during the call, my voice steady but seething. Is partying every other night and blowing money on lavish trips with you part of supporting herself? I asked. His silence was deafening, a tacit admission of her reckless spending. He mumbled something about her lifestyle being just for show, insisting that she was actually struggling financially. Then came the bombshell: she had been dipping into her savings to cover his tuition as a master's student. That was the final straw. The pieces of the puzzle snapped into place: her extravagant lifestyle, the neglect of our children, the constant pleas for more money. It was all funding her new life with him, a man she'd known for barely a year, while our kids went without. I hung up, blocked his number, and felt a surge of resolve. She would answer for this in court, and I would ensure it. The realization that she had prioritized her fleeting relationship over our children was a gut punch. It wasn't just about the money, it was about her complete disregard for their well-being. She had chosen to lavish her resources on a man who offered her nothing but fleeting thrills, while our kids were left to eat cheap, unhealthy food and wear worn-out clothes. The child support I sent, meant to provide for their needs, had been siphoned off to bankroll her escapades and his education. It was unconscionable, and it hardened my resolve to see this lawsuit through to the end. She had crossed a line that no parent should ever cross, and I was done letting her manipulations cloud my judgment. As I reflect on the past few months, I'm struck by how much has changed. The kids are thriving under my care, their laughter filling our home with a warmth I hadn't realized I'd missed. They rarely mention their mother now, and when they do, it's with a detachment that speaks volumes. They're happy, secure, and finally free from the chaos she created. The lawsuit, as expected, concluded in my favor. She lost, and now she owes me a substantial sum, money she can no longer squander on nights out or impulsive trips. Her days of living like a carefree 20-something are over, and I find it oddly fitting. She's in her late 30s, a mother of 2, yet she chose to act like a reckless teenager, chasing fleeting pleasures while neglecting her responsibilities. It's a chapter of my life I'm glad to close. Reconnecting with my old friends has been a lifeline. Their concern and support have reminded me of the community I pushed away in my grief. They've welcomed me back with open arms, and I'm grateful for their patience. The kids, too, are benefiting from this renewed sense of connection. They're surrounded by people who care about them, who celebrate their milestones and cheer them on. It's a stark contrast to the instability they endured with their mother, and it's given me hope for the future. Looking back, I see now how her deception unraveled. Her social media was a carefully crafted lie, a veneer of success that hid her true priorities. The trips, the parties, the ostentatious displays of wealth, it was all a mirage, funded at the expense of our children's well-being. I don't know what she was thinking, burning through money like that while claiming poverty. Perhaps she thought she could keep up the charade indefinitely, or maybe she believed I'd never find out. Either way, her choices have caught up with her, and I'm no longer tethered to her chaos. The road ahead feels lighter now. With the kids in my care and the lawsuit behind me, I'm focused on building a stable, joyful life for us. The wounds of the divorce are healing, and I'm rediscovering the strength I'd lost in the aftermath. My ex-wife's actions, while painful, have only clarified what truly matters: my children, my peace, and the relationships I'm rebuilding. She may have fooled me for a time, but the truth has set me free, And I'm moving forward with clarity and purpose.